Next on our agenda is the board chair's report, superintendent's report, and committee reports. Then we're going on to the Common Core State Standards review and discussion, and looking at the MillerDriscoll Statement of Requirements. I only have a couple of comments here for a board chair report. Earlier this week, the Council on Public Facilities met with the Board of Selectmen to review the Board of Education's proposed capital bonded projects, as well as those items that are of a real property nature in our operating budget. And I'm pleased to say that there were no major surprises in that meeting, and it does appear as though our capital bonding proposals are going to be going forth for town vote. So I'm pretty excited about that. Secondly, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting us to participate in Speak Up Wilton this past Saturday. It was my first time in the hot seat, so to speak, because of the work that Dr. Richards and his team did in preparing me with notes and backup collateral, and Tim and Ken sitting and Gil sitting in the wings to support me from a question and answer perspective. It was a fantastic event.
Where are those art exhibits?
I have a report on that.
Yeah, I was going to say for the cameras, we only have one question that stumped us, and that was relative to art that has been given to the district through the PTA, and we do owe an answer back on that, so we will get that. If there are any other questions that didn't come up through Speak Up Wilton, please get them to us through the board email alias. We'd be more than happy to try to address those. And with that, Dr. Richards.
Good evening. I have 4 items quickly. In terms of our winter sports season, we're at the end of the season. Hockey, boys hockey qualified for the FCAC tournament and the state tournament, and they've advanced to the quarterfinals of the state tournament Friday night. Boys basketball qualified for the state tournament for the first time since 2000. They lost to Trinity Catholic in the second round, and this is their first winning record, so it's a real improvement for the boys basketball program. Girls basketball had a fabulous year. They finished the season with 15 wins and qualified for both the FCAC and state tournaments. They were what I'm perhaps most proud of, they were selected by basketball officials for the 2012 Sportsmanship Award. I don't know if any of you saw this morning, there was a story on about a high school parent who went to a hockey game in Massachusetts, and he was shining it in the goalie's eye of the opposing team. And I think that when you look at sportsmanship, I think I've been proud so many times when I've seen our athletes comporting themselves in a really classy way. So that's terrific that they got that award. In gymnastics, they were FCAC champions and finished 4th place in the state. Some of the athletes, some of the gymnasts are moving on to the New Englands. So that's a great honor. Girls ice hockey qualified for the state tournament, but I believe they lost and are out of the tournament, if that information is correct. Boys swimming had a winning season. The boys skiers, Class S state champions, undefeated 2nd year in a row. So terrific job for the ski team. And the girls were Class S 4th place and State Open 5th place. So we had a great season and a lot of involvement of our young people in sports during the winter season. Second item, last Friday night was, some of you attended, Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? It was sponsored by the Wilton Education Foundation. This was the 2nd year, and MillerDriscoll's own king of kindergarten, as they called him, Sal Jimo, was the MC, and he rocked it. He's a very funny guy, and the adults and students who participated in this included our teacher Karen Brooks, who is, I believe, at MillerDriscoll and Cider Mill. No, just MillerDriscoll, excuse me. Senior Will Jankowski, one of our outstanding seniors at the high school. Cider Mill science instructional leader Kevin Meehan, Middlebrook teacher Janet Nobles, and they were the adult contestants, and very, very funny, and the kids were unbelievable, the 5th graders. Special thanks to Maxine Berg, who chaired this event, and of course to our chair Kit Smith of the Wilton Education Foundation, and to the volunteers who do so much. I haven't seen how much they raised, but they worked very hard on this, and I think it was a great, great family evening. That night was also the 36th annual Wilton Jazz Symposium. I don't know if any of you had a chance to attend this event. It was in the little theater. I was able to sneak over after Are You Smarter and listen in. It was an event that was started 36 years ago by John Rhodes. There wasn't a Connecticut High School Jazz Festival before that symposium, and John started that and has been an integral part ever since. This event featured jazz bands from our high school, of course, Brian McMahon, Fairfield Ward, Darien, Danbury, Norwalk, and the Western Connecticut State University Band. The evening was culminated by a performance of the Berkshire Big Band, a group that's led by former Wilton High Fine and Performing Arts instructional leader Chip Zellner, after whom the Zellner Gallery was named, a great, great teacher. And also features a tall, good-looking trumpeter named Chip Gall. And I had a chance, I said, to listen to a few numbers after the Are You Smarter, and it was a great, great evening. I think the kids get a lot out of it. The college group will critique some of the student performance, which is a neat part of the symposium. The last item I have tonight is one that I offer with profoundly mixed feelings. It was something I would hope not to have to get into for some time, but I want to report that our exceptionally talented and committed Director of Human Resources and General Administration, Ellen Andrews, has announced her retirement and will be leaving us in June after a distinguished great career and 8 years of extraordinary service to this district. Her 36-year career began in HR. Some of you know this, others you may not, with her in HR position at the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center. And as she progressed through Cornell Medical Center, New York Hospital, in increasingly more responsible HR positions, she left and then went on to spend 10 years at Yale New Haven Hospital, where she ultimately assumed the position of staffing and workforce development for an organization that had, get this, 6,000 employees. That's a huge operation. From 2000 to 2004, she served as Director of Human Resources for the Milford Public Schools, and it was my great honor to make the first hire that I was able to make as your superintendent was in 2004, was to hire her. And I can truly say that she has contributed to our work in so many ways these past 8 years. She's also played a very important role in supporting and really expanding support for the United Way in Wilton, and has served in a leadership role in the State Connecticut Association of School Personnel Administrators. She's really going to be missed, but we're really happy she'll have more time to spend with that incredible family of hers, a beautiful grandchild, and that the community organizations and her church and other groups that she's committed to. So, Ellen, this is the first of many words of thank you that you'll hear in the next several months, and we really appreciate all you've done for us. And having said that, I have not accepted, nor will I, your letter. Next item, Mr. Chair. We have been involved in, we've begun last few days some preliminary planning for the search for a successor, and I'll keep the board informed. I talked with Bruce about this today a little bit, and we'll be establishing the search committee and moving forward. But thank you, Ellen, and to be continued.
As thrilled as we are for you, we are disappointed for the town of Wilton. It's with as Gary says, it's with a heavy heart that we say to the depths of our thanks. We greatly appreciate everything you've done for us, and we wish you bon voyage. And if you miss doing what you're doing, and you want to think twice about it, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any committee reports?
I have one. The Wilton Energy Commission. The Wilton Energy Management Plan that I think I talked to the board about a couple months ago is going to be formally presented to the Board of Selectmen on March 19th. It's a plan that is really intended to benefit the town, trackside, the schools, the library, and the town hall campus. And some of the recommendations are to designate a single person to input monthly energy data into the plan. And that would be a person from each school and a person from each department. And designation of an energy champion at each school and each town department. And we will be formalizing what that might look like at a later date.
Thank you.
I also have a report. Last week I attended my first CES meeting, and I was very warmly welcomed by the group. I think it's going to be an association that I'll enjoy. There was a few others in the group who were there for the first time as well. I learned a couple tidbits of information I thought I'd bring back to you. One was that among the many services that they provide the districts, is they do offer help in professional searches.
It's a good thing we don't have it.
Little timely. For example, they're actively seeking, they have 6 superintendent searches that they're actively.
We're not looking for one of those.
No, you better not be.
No, we're not.
One at a time is good enough, and New Canaan actually is one of the ones that they're currently searching for. So that was something that I didn't know, a service that they provide. The other we talked about calendars, and they were saying how one of the groups, I think it was in southeastern, get my geography right, Connecticut, the districts there merge their calendars specifically so that they can have the same professional development days, so that they can share expenses, share talent, and make, I'm sure that's something you're aware of, but it was an interesting thought.
The reason I was smiling is that my predecessor, the distinguished Dr. David Clune, for the 22 years he was in this chair, tried to get a unified calendar in Fairfield County. We called it the Clune calendar. And I think, and Molly would probably know better, but I think we were able to get most of the districts to buy on for maybe, what, Molly, 1 year?
1 year.
And boards, for some reason, I know you wouldn't understand that, the calendar assumes a life of its own. I'm teasing because calendars it's been so I'm glad to see that some districts are doing that. I think that you may see
I thought in theory it was
groundswell.
a very interesting idea.
The truth is we're getting closer, but we're still not there. And it is somewhat. We're going to be doing some professional development and sharing, as I understand it, with one of our neighboring districts. So that's a perfect rationale for that. So if we could just get some of the boards to go along with us, but they have idiosyncrasies and
of course.
how they plan.
If there's any out there that want to agree with our calendar, it'd be great. Wonderful, thank you. Any other reports? We have Assistant Superintendent Canty coming up to speak with us next about the, no we don't. Oh yeah, we do, about the Common Core State Standards. Please come up. I was jumping ahead, sorry, I was taking you straight to Miller-Driscoll, but it's Common Core State Standards review and discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Lakely. Tonight's report is actually timely, coming on the heels of Senator Boucher's report, as I'll be speaking to educational reform efforts here in Connecticut and across the country. The goals of this presentation actually are quite simplistic. On this beautiful spring-like day, just want to plant the seed with the Board of Education about the looming adoption and implementation of the Common Core state standards here in our district and again across the state of Connecticut. I also want to talk about the implications of the adoption of the Common Core as it relates to our assessment practices, which will be dramatically changed in the 2014-2015 school year. Joining me here tonight, I'm quite pleased to have Mrs. Chris Markley, who's here, and also Ms. Nicole Strass. Mrs. Markley is representing our K-12 instructional leadership team in the English Language Arts area, and Ms. Strauss is representing our K-12 instructional leadership team in the area of mathematics. And any good seasoned central office administrator is going to have some teachers in the audience if he is unable to answer questions from the board. We'll see how that goes. I really hope to provide you with an efficient report, so here we go. The history of the standards movement, you may or may not know, back in the 90s, most states adopted standards on their own. And in fact, Connecticut was one of the states that adopted its own standards. And those standards could be best described as a mile wide and an inch deep. I read somewhere that if we were to effectively implement the Connecticut state standards, you'd need 250 school days to make that happen. So it's important to note that the Common Core state standards actually are quite fewer in number and go in depth in terms of student learning. The other piece, of course, is that this has been a cooperative effort across the country. 45 states at this point have adopted these state standards, and the extent to which this shared platform for collaboration is something that we can leverage here in Connecticut and across the country is something that I think will really be an important reform effort for us. The third piece that I'd like to emphasize around the state standards is there's really three elements that I think you'll find are consistent themes that run through the standards, and that's a focus, a coherence, and a rigorous approach to curriculum, which again speaks to this idea of going deep, digging deep into the skill sets that our students will need to be successful. So again, you'll find that one of the primary drivers of the state standards is they are aligned with college and work expectations. The focus at this point is in the English language arts and mathematics area. I spoke to the issue of rigor, the application of knowledge. It is true that to a large extent this movement and the work evolved from the analysis of top performing countries internationally. And that has played an important piece in this as we recognize that our students need to be competitive in a global economy. And finally, these standards are research and evidence-based. I quite often drive Dr. Richards from the room. Today is no exception.
You know,
I hope he's okay.
it would be fun when he walks back in the room to say, in conclusion. It's all right with me if you do that.
It means I'm acting superintendent right now.
Let's see how he reacts.
The Common Core state standards come with a mission statement. The driving themes, again, are around consistency, the idea that we really want to be clear about what our students are expected to learn, not only for teachers but for our parents. Robust, designed to be relevant to the real world, knowledge and skills, again, the college and career piece, and the global economy emphasis. I just want to take you quickly through some elements of the Common Core. If you were to dig down deep into the arrangement of how these standards are organized, you'd find that there's anchor standards that are found as organizing themes, and then you have clusters at the K-5 and 6-12 level, and then you get down into grade level analysis. And on the English language arts side, there's an emphasis in the area of reading and writing, listening, and finally in the extent to which we're trying to improve students' language capability. But a recurring theme around the standards is this idea of what might be called a staircase approach, of building mastery through each grade level, so that there is an assumption that students master the skills that come in a grade level and then they move on to the next grade level. The important themes around the Reading Common Core is the idea of text complexity. I think Ms. Markley will agree with me that that's one of the major tenets of the standards. And also secondarily, a real focus on the progressive evolution of reading comprehension in our students to build what might be described as higher levels of reading comprehension through the standards. You'll still find a focus on classic and contemporary literature, and the extent also to which that the reading standards do in fact sweep across all content areas. The fact that reading and writing, I think you would find, have equal billing in the standards. One of the big shifts in the writing area is the extent to which there's focus on argument writing, informational text writing, and narrative across all grade levels. Whereas now, if I understand it correctly, there's a progression through those various elements of writing through the grade levels. So it happens in an integrated approach. The other big point of emphasis is around opinion writing. Presenting students with an opportunity to form arguments, to develop a critical stance, to use research through both short focus projects and longer term in-depth research so that they can apply their reasoning and develop sound arguments as they move through their writing. The speaking and listening is also an important element in the Common Core English Language Arts standards. I think the main focus area here is around academic discussion. You see that in the second bullet. Really providing students with targeted one-on-one, small group, and whole class setting opportunities to develop their speaking and listening skills. It's interesting how I think there's a strong connection here with our 21st century skill development work, because this focus on collaboration is increasingly something you find in our classrooms, where you have teams of students working together to develop thoughtful arguments around problem solving. And then finally, the language area, it's really a conversation around vocabulary. Actually, part of a meeting today, our K-5 literacy team is talking about the challenge of responding to the Common Core initiative around vocabulary development and having the time to do that. But the extent to which an emphasis on vocabulary is found in the standards is quite obvious and deliberate. And I think one of the things to really emphasize here is there's a focus on what would be described as academic vocabulary. The idea here that we're going to be looking across the content areas to make sure that students are skilled and versed in the vocabulary development, not just in terms of the English language arts work that they're doing. In terms of the math piece, it's in some respects I feel comfortable that we're already accomplishing a lot of the goals that are outlined in the math standards. The big nuance, though, is that the progression of skill sets is much surprisingly is not aligned with the work that we're currently doing. There's tremendous gaps in the Common Core. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the standards for math practice form the foundation around the standards. They're focused, they're rigorous, and again, this idea of coherence. And you see an outline here of the various elements around effective instruction in the mathematics area that form the foundation of the Common Core. Again, if you read through this list here, I think you'd find that a lot of this is already happening in our classrooms. The big challenge will be to align the work with the proper grade level approach that the Common Core calls for. To that end, in the K-8 level, you're going to see an emphasis on procedure, as well as an increasing emphasis on conceptual understanding. There'll be, again, this idea of a progression of mastery to build foundational skills so that students can move into applications in higher grade levels. And the extent to which the work around the development of math standards is organized by what's called domains at the K-8 level. And it's really interesting, again, in math you really see this focus on less is more, because there's a real targeted emphasis on developing number sense, on working, for example, at the K2 and 3-5 level in the development of whole number operations, geometry strand throughout, and then in the 6 through 8 alignment you see a real emphasis on ratio and proportional reasoning, which forms the foundation for algebraic conversations. So our math teachers now are engaged in this exercise, working with their instructional leadership team, trying to identify what our current program looks like and align it with the Common Core. And again, we're finding that if you took grade 2, for example, you could list on almost a full page those aspects of grade 2 work that's ongoing now that needs to shift to a different grade level. And then at the same time, you'd see a list of skill sets that need to be moved into grade 2. And this is causing our math team to step back and say, hey, we have some challenges ahead of us. So when you move into the high school realm, I think you're probably going to find still a somewhat traditional course sequence in place as you get to the high school. But again, it's based on conceptual categories that you see there, and the ability of giving our students an opportunity to apply mathematical thinking to real-world issues, and an emphasis on modeling, which is becoming more and more in play, not only in math but in science, where students try to use a modeling process to develop their own theory about mathematical arrangements and such. So it's important as you consider the standards to recognize that there's a great amount of work that needs to go into how to teach the standards. So they don't necessarily tell teachers how they should teach. They don't necessarily focus in on all that they can teach. In other words, you could have advanced work beyond the core. There's not a great deal of discussion on the extent to which the standards would support students with special needs or that require intervention. But then again, there is this emphasis on the focus on skill sets that are necessary for post-high school planning. But I think we need to be somewhat aware of the fact that there could be work that goes beyond that. You just can't rely on the standards and say they're the be-all, end-all. There's work to be done beyond that as well. Now, part two of the conversation is the assessment piece. As you put your standards in place, you model the instruction around the standards. Now you have to put your assessment practices. And what the challenge here will be to take the Common Core and then develop an assessment system that would allow us to conclude that students are indeed ready to move on after high school and be college or career ready. Connecticut joined what many of you have already heard about, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. This is a group of over 30 states that are developing assessments that will align with the Common Core. The system is designed to develop a comprehensive and innovative assessment system for grades 3 through 8, which is aligned with now where the Connecticut Mastery Test is given, and then in high school. And right now the focus seems to be grade 11 as opposed to grade 10 for the high school assessment piece. And again, the recurring theme of preparing students for post-secondary success is part of the equation. I'm not going to get into the specifics here of the assessment piece, but at the end of the day, you're going to try to take the Common Core, give teachers the tools that they need to help students prepare to take these assessments, and then hopefully be demonstrating that they have those skills. And basically there's a triangle of 3 assessment components that you'll see come into play. One is formative assessment practices, which teachers can use throughout the school year to try to develop the necessary skill sets and get immediate feedback that can help them determine if students need greater follow-through. Interim assessments would be given again during the year and would provide teachers with feedback that would help them determine where students need perhaps some extra help or remediation. But the big key are the summative assessments. And here you're going to have 2 basic categories that will kick in the school year 2014-15. These assessments are going to be given actually during the last 12 weeks of school. So of course my immediate reaction to that was, how would it impact the school calendar? We'll have to see how that plays out. That's down the line. But the performance tasks speak to providing, through a computer-delivered assessment system, an opportunity for students to demonstrate that they can integrate and apply knowledge and skills that are framed around the CCSS. It's going to be very challenging. And then this adaptive assessment piece is a very exciting development in that, I don't know if you're familiar with the adaptive model, but what this does through computer-based delivery is it actually takes students through a progression where, based on the responses that they give on an assessment, it takes them either to a greater level of complexity or keeps them on target in terms of whether they're answering the question right or wrong. So you'll have this ability to really personalize the assessment process through what's called an adaptive approach. And we're finding now that increasingly there are a number of vendors and providers out there that are working in this realm. So in moving forward, which is the basic theme again that I wanted to reinforce with the board tonight, I wanted to build awareness of the CCSS work that's taking place. I wanted you to know that this year we are heavily immersed in the gap analysis and grade alignment work, grade level alignment work. Again, Ms. Markley and Ms. Strauss have been working closely with their colleagues on that type of work. We find that the gap analysis is yielding less concern in the language arts English area. It's yielding some significant concern in the math area. We're going to need to develop and refine our curriculum maps. And the real important part that's somewhat frustrating, we're finding, read an article today, in fact, that there aren't a lot of resources out there that will help teachers develop the instructional models that will be reactive to the standards. So that's a piece of concern. Not only do you have to map the curriculum, but then you have to be able to deliver effective instruction. So for example, you talk about text complexity. You know, do teachers really have the resources to look at units of study that will help in that regard? That's a growth area across the country. And then this whole idea of whether we're going to have the infrastructure in place here in our district and across the state to implement effectively this computer-delivered assessment tools. And then the idea of professional development will obviously be a big part of this. So here's the timeline. In the coming school year, we'll continue to work on an implementation plan to put the CCSS-based curriculum in place in the English language arts and math area, but also please recognize that there's a literacy piece that's going to impact all content areas. We need to continue with the ongoing professional development efforts. I think at this point in this current school year, you'd find the instructional leadership teams are somewhat versed in the CCSS, but I'm not sure our teachers have a strong understanding in mass about what's coming. So we have to, I'm actually thinking about taking this show on the road to our teachers to make sure they know what's coming, particularly as it relates to 2014, 2015, when we're going to have students prepared to take these assessments. The state has informed local districts that you'll be excited to have a fully implemented CCS-based curriculum in 2013, 2014. Boy, that's ambitious. So we're going to do our best, but you know, there's a real timeline here. We're trying to, I think we're probably in fairly good shape, but the big issue is where do you find the time to do this work? It's going to be very overwhelming. And then, of course, you know, we're already thinking about that right going into the coming school year. We're looking at our first graders through our 8th graders currently, and trying to think about what do we have to do even beginning next year to make sure these students are ready for the new assessments in that 2014-2015 school year. So it's going to be a tremendous challenge. There's a great deal of work to be done. And we're going to have to see whether this ambitious timeline is actually going to yield the kind of results that you see up here on this calendar. I will say that, you know, in the current administration of the CMT and the CAPT, that there are in fact pilot groups through supplemental tests that are working with computer delivery assessments opportunities. So the state is actually field testing these types of test elements already in this current test cycle that we're in the middle of right now in the month of March. So it's coming. It's going to have implications for our program. In particular, we're taking a good hard look at our math program at the K-8 level to see what direction we need to go to implement an effective CCS-based math curriculum. We're just going to need to have our teachers, our administrators, and our board members keeping their eyes out for the implications of this work as we move forward. Okay? So I planted the seed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Questions?
The computer delivered assessment, I'm a little confused there. Is that something that the state is going to provide, the computer adaptive assessment? Like that's going to be like a CMT, like a test, or is that
We'll
a tool we have to look for?
in the next 2 school years, we'll continue to give the CMT and the CAPT
Right.
in its current form.
Mhm.
But in the 2014-2015 school year, we'll be working with the state to provide assessments to our students that will be delivered through a computer-based system. Our challenge will be to make sure we have the infrastructure in place to make that happen. There's discussion around creating testing windows. You know, you're obviously not going to test 300 students at once. You don't have that kind of capability. You don't have that number of computers available to students. So they're looking at flexible testing windows where you take students through in cohorts. And it will be, in fact, the actual assessment instruments will be, to your point, state provided, right?
Replacement for CAP and CMT?
Yes.
Or your question about the adaptive, there's been some work that ERB, for example, has been doing with ETS on developing a new type of assessment, standardized assessment that is adaptive from the sense that it, depending on how, it has a branching system. And if you're a sharp math student. The problem with contemporary testing instruments is that our kids top out all of them.
Right,
They
right,
race
yeah.
through.
Right.
And adaptive is a little bit different model that it sees based on your responses. If you miss the hard ones, it takes you back and track so that you get a deeper picture of what you know, as opposed to the student who doesn't, after the first easy question, they don't know anything. So it's going to be, it's evolving. But as Tim said, the problem with the assessments, and excuse me, and I was at suburban school superintendents where we were having presentations, not as concise and as good as the one I think we just had, but from people on the state national standards. And the problem that districts are all over the country, and they're all districts like ours, the suburban schools of America, the 100 districts that are in it, is this capacity issue. Is that the guy said, how many of you currently have an ability to offer the online testing in a fairly short window of time? And nobody raised their hands because and it's also a bandwidth issue.
Right.
So it's really a lot, an ambitious, as Tim said, a program ahead of us to try and figure out how to do it. But I think once we cross over that and have the online ability, it's going to be hugely important because we'll get the immediate feedback.
Now
we take the,
immediate grade.
yeah, you'll get the feedback, fairly, maybe not instantaneously, but in weeks.
Yeah.
Now we take this test
Months.
in March,
Right.
Right.
and the principals are sitting there in August, maybe, with the first look at the
Right.
data. So it's really going to be, I think, an exciting new world for us. With that.
Maybe we'll get some weeks back in March.
I was going to say calendar. Calendar implications. Again.
We did talk about that as a minute.
Right, oh my God.
Any other questions?
Is this test is the same across the country? Or is it just a test that's being developed for Connecticut based on these standards?
My understanding is states will have some flexibility in working in the consortium. It's something I'd have to follow up with you. In other words, your question is, will students be taking the same test in
Right.
Connecticut that they're taking in New York?
Yeah.
And I think that there's, my understanding is the state will have some control over that. But on the other hand, it is, in fact, a standards-based approach across the country. So there is going to be more uniformity
Right.
of assessment as it really, across state boundaries, I should say.
Does this tie in well with the strategic plan?
Well, in some respects, I would say it does. You think about an evolving curriculum. You think about assured experiences.
The rigor piece.
Rigor. I think to a large extent the standards are grounded in our work to try to make sure that we're providing students with cutting-edge instructional practices, 21st century skill development. Certainly, every review that we've heard is that this is challenging. This isn't lowering the bar. This is actually digging deep and creating an environment where students are really going to have to be forced to think at higher levels.
Do we as Wiltonians have a choice, or do we just have to step in and do this?
Do we have a choice as to whether or not?
Whether or not we participate in this program?
I think if you want to receive state funding.
Well, we don't get any of that,
That's an interesting question. I think my counterpart, your friend at Scarsdale, and ERB has been looking at this too, is that there's some concern that the whole standards-based thing, which will be good for districts that have not achieved, and to try and help raise the boats in that area. But many high-achieving districts are looking at this as being a straitjacket.
Right.
And so we're seeing there's a movement to try to see if districts, and Scarsdale's kind of taking the lead. Now again, Scarsdale is a district, you may remember, that has really moved away from advanced placement, and also was challenging the commissioner about the time spent on the New York State standardized tests. So there's a movement that some of us are interested in to say, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. While the standards may be good, we're getting this one-size-fits-all thing that is a little bit disconcerting for many districts like ours.
At the same time, though, there is a reality that there's an expectation that a high-performing school district like ours, that our students are going to respond well, no matter what type of assessment package comes their way. You know, they walk through our school doors highly capable. And we've always, I think, in our school district, gauged our effectiveness, not necessarily on strong test performance, because as Dr. Richards said, you know, our students can test out quickly on say, the CMT or the CAP. You know, we try to judge the quality of our school district on our rigorous contemporary curriculum. You know, so you'll notice in my presentation, we made the point that the standards don't set the ceiling, they set the foundation. You know, and we're going to have to be sure to make sure that we're providing our students with a rigorous experience that goes beyond the foundation that the standards provide. I don't know if you can comment on that back there, experts in the field.
We always treated them as the minimum
Right.
for the Connecticut frameworks, and now the national standards, they're our minimum, and we move on through them and over and over again to give the children as many different and varied experiences to reinforce a skill as we can come up with.
Tim, is this change going to have any impact on our performance-based graduation requirements? Because as I understand it now, one of the ways they can fulfill that requirement is to pass the CAP test. And you've got 2 years to do that. And now we're pushing the testing back to 11th grade.
Right. It's an interesting question. We haven't, at least I'm not privy or aware of any guidance from the state on how that would be impacted, because after all, the performance-based piece is a state-driven legislative mandate, and the CAP being one part of that. So I anticipate that we'll find that they'll probably link, from a state standpoint, some level of performance-based competency on these high school exams to graduation. But I would also expect, as we currently have, there'll be multiple criteria that would also satisfy that expectation. So at the end of the day, I don't think this means we're going to walk away from that performance-based piece as it relates to graduation. I think we'll just have to we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out, and what these assessments look like, and what type of performance level would be expected as a proficiency level that would meet some type of performance-based expectation.
I'm thinking of the student who might have a difficult time with the test, not be proficient the first time around. It gives you less time to plan that alternative that will satisfy that requirement.
Well, and it also gives you one less year.
That's what I mean,
Right.
one less year.
One
yeah.
less year. And that's something we'll have to take a good hard look at.
Well, they also have one more year to prepare. I mean, before they'll be 1 year,
Right.
have one more year of school behind them. Where she takes
They'll be 1 year smarter.
But if they don't get to your point, they don't get the turnaround of the data, and you're taking it in March, say, of your junior year, we don't get the data till the summer, so you've got 10 months to
figure out another way to meet that performance
figure out
requirement.
how to help someone get to the goal line.
It also speaks to the issue at the high school level of whether the assessments take on a course feature, a Regents type feature, course exit exams. You know, certainly the high school reform efforts that were in play were talking about exit exams in core academic
I
areas.
lived through that.
So we have to see how that plays out as well.
She did too. Yeah, wonderful. Other questions?
One is, well, and Mrs. Barclay answered it because I was going to ask about, we already pay attention to the state standards before the CCSS. And you mentioned several times, even before tonight, about math being something that's going to be more difficult of the two. And because the CCSS are only math and ELA, but obviously math, if we shift math, that I imagine will have an impact on our science curriculum, or will there not? Do you not see that coming down, like affecting it?
I think that there's a strong relationship between the expectations that are found in the math sequencing and our science programs. I think my experience is that that becomes most important at the high school level. I don't mean to minimize the alignment K-8, but to a large extent, I think the realignment of the development of math skills at the K-8 level, it's going to be less of an issue with science, but there will be implications with our program at the high school level, depending on how our course sequencing plays out, because there are certain prerequisite math skills that need, for example, in an honors chemistry course, you have to have a certain level of math proficiency. So we're going to have to see how that is playing out in terms of a progression of skill development that will allow students to be effective in chemistry. Because, I don't know, Ms. Strauss, give you an opportunity to speak, but there's certainly evidence that the Common Core will impact the traditional algebra curriculum and the
Yes.
traditional geometry
Yes.
curriculum. Can you just speak to that briefly?
Sure. The way that the Common Core for the math works is that because, especially at the K-5 piece, it's much more focused on the number sense and then the basic computation skills and expecting that mastery, it's actually shifting a lot of more algebraic topics down to the 6-8 piece. And so once students get to an algebra course, what we think of currently as an Algebra 1 course, under the new standards, it's actually going to combine Algebra 1 topics with quite a bit of topics from what is currently in an Algebra 2. And then a lot of the, in the geometry courses, it's really a more advanced geometry course that's in the standards. The Algebra 2 course that's lined up in the standards really has kind of almost a second half of Algebra 2 and some pre-calculus concepts. So those courses that are being taken, students actually may end up being even better prepared, or more students prepared for some of the science courses, simply because they're shifting some of the more algebraic kind of skills to be ready for that down a couple of levels.
That's a good question.
Were you finished? I'm sorry, Laura. Were you?
Oh, I had a different.
No, go ahead. You
No,
can-
no.
It kind of relates to the math question. Obviously, 45 other states, or 44 other states are doing this. There's other districts, even in our own DERG, that are obviously in the same situation as we are. So how are we partnering with them, benchmarking? Perhaps there are districts that have already made this huge leap, especially in math. I know Westport has made a huge change over the last year. So how are we planning to partner and benchmark with our
Well, there's a
friends?
great deal of communication going on between school districts on the issue of math. In fact, even this week, there's been a great deal of communication through email channels with assistant superintendents for curriculum instruction talking about, well, what are you doing?
Right.
What program are you taking a look at if you're determining that you need to make a change? So there's certainly a great deal of evidence that it would not be in a school district's best interest to try to journey through this on their own.
And to start from scratch, right?
We have, tomorrow morning, I'll be over at CES for a curriculum council meeting and with my colleagues, and we're all collaborating and talking. I'm
Okay.
working closely with Weston right now on what they're doing with their math program.
Okay,
So we're involved in that conversation.
good.
When will we hear an update on your math journey?
I think there's a reasonable expectation that we may need the board's counsel sometime in the spring months on where we need to go in mathematics. I can't, at this point, give a determination about what that would look like. It's very much up in the air. What we do know is that in the coming school year, we're at the K-8 level, we're going to be prepared to move forward with our University of Chicago approach. And at the same time, though, we are involved in this gap analysis feature, and we're determining what supplemental type work we may need to do to help prepare students 2 years out for the new assessments. You're going to hear back from us, though, I anticipate, here coming up this year.
Laura, you had another question?
Oh, and just when the adaptive assessment made me think of technology and student success plans. Are those, I mean, is this going to affect those, or will it just be easy enough to factor that all in? I mean,
I'm not sure, because of the uncertainty around the student success plans piece, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in our board workshop next week, next Wednesday afternoon on technology applications. I don't know the answer to the question to the extent to which the student success plan will include assessment profiles. What I do know is that will certainly be part of our RTI Studio data warehousing approach, using that technology feature to track individual student performance data, and also look for the extent to which we have to take a good hard look at programmatic assessment data.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next on our agenda, the topic that I wanted to jump to previously is the continuation of our never-ending story. We're gonna have a presentation of the MillerDriscoll Statement of Requirements. We're gonna review and discuss that. Sure.
Before Karen begins her presentation, I'd like to note tonight, and she's going to talk a little bit about the journey and the historical evolution of this over what seems like stems back to a long time, that really began in 2004 as we began to look at the needs of the preschool program. And I think during that time, I think it's fair to say that many volunteers, many staff have worked on this project. I'd like to thank, and we'll do in a more formal way later on, those who've served on the steering committee, the MillerDriscoll steering committee over the year, but also to extend our thanks to Troy Allen Dixon, who chaired the steering committee for many years with unflagging energy, enthusiasm, commitment, and certainly determination and intelligence. So we really, she kept pushing to improve the work. And we're really grateful that Karen was able to join this group and to work on this third iteration of the Statement of Requirements. As you know, the board passed one in March of 2008. We came back to you this past September 22nd with a second iteration, and tonight Karen is going to present the third iteration of this. And so she's really put the kind of diligence into this, as Troy Allen has, that really has been so helpful, and I'm so appreciative of that. I'd also like to thank MillerDriscoll principals Cheryl Jensen-Gerner, who just is not only a great instructional leader, but blew me away with her knowledge of every nook and cranny in a building that after 8 years, yours truly continues to wander around trying to find out where he is at a given time. And so she's been so helpful in doing this, and also our maintenance staff, Sean and the maintenance staff, the preschool director, Fred Repsinski, and special services director, Ann Paul, and many others to be named down the road. But thanks, Karen. I just wanted to kind of get that in before you kicked it off, and your willingness to help us with this.
Well, I will echo your thanks to all of those people, because without them, we wouldn't be here tonight. There's no question about that. Okay. I'm going to begin by briefly giving you the background of the project, and then I will talk about how the project fits into Wilton's capital bonded project process, talk about what is a statement of requirements, and then get into the vision and objectives of the project and the facility requirements. As the board knows, MillerDriscoll School serves Wilton's youngest students. Miller opened in 1966 and Driscoll followed in 1969. The schools were physically linked by the Peach Corps in 1989, and the most recent addition was the addition of a new administrative area and a library media center area in 1996. And in 2010, we combined the two schools into one. And as Wilton's early elementary school, MillerDriscoll really is the first point of contact for many families considering a move to Wilton. And I think that as Wilton's gateway school, an investment in MillerDriscoll School really is an investment in the town of Wilton as well as our students. As Dr. Richards said, this project started out as a project to add preschool space. Because in 2004, the district realized that the preschool population was going to exceed the available space. In evaluating what the best approach to this was, at that time there was space in Comstock, and so the board looked at, do we move the preschool to Comstock, or do we keep the preschool at MillerDriscoll and expand the space? And the decision was made to keep the preschool at the MillerDriscoll campus. The main reasons were because doing so would ease the preschool to kindergarten transition. It would maximize our opportunities to share special services, resources, and professional staff, i.e. avoid overlap of staff and resources at two different locations. And it would minimize immediate capital expenditure for a move and also ongoing operational cost, duplication of costs. As the steering committee went about their work of analyzing the spatial needs of the preschool, what they realized were there were emerging needs of the K-2 program that were not being met, and they were both, the needs were both programmatic and there were needs with the facility. And at about that same time, there were major updates and replacements that were needed at MillerDriscoll, that are still needed, such as a roof replacement and the replacement of the Corten steel siding, that went on to the Board of Education's 5-year capital plan. As the steering committee went about its work, there were a number of questions that came up, and they necessitated doing additional work. There was a question about site coverage and the existence of wetlands on the site. So the steering committee set out and had an A2 survey of the site done and also a wetlands survey. There was a question raised about the condition and capacity of the septic system. So the steering committee undertook a septic study. There were questions about the square footage of the facility. There were conflicting numbers as to how many square feet were in the facility. The steering committee found that there were no as-built plans for MillerDriscoll anywhere on the town hall campus. So they had someone come in and actually measure the building and create as-built drawings. As for the Wilton capital process, every bonded capital project proposed in Wilton must follow Wilton's capital bonded project process. And essentially that is a 5-phase approval process. And this project is in the 2nd phase of that process, and that's called the requirements phase. And what is done in the requirements phase is you complete a document called a statement of requirements. And a statement of requirements defines the what, the where, the functions, and the vision of the proposed project. The document must list all the spaces needed and the functions to be accommodated in each space, with the sizes and the functional relationship of each space to each other. It must contain a vision statement that it can include things such as aesthetics and a desire for it to be a green building. It should enumerate the need or the lack of need for any special engineering features. And this is very important. The document should enumerate the needs and wishes, but it should not provide a solution. So as the board knows, the original statement of requirements included only the preschool part of the project, and that was in January of this year sent back to the Board of Education by the Board of Selectmen with the request that the statement of requirements be expanded to include the spatial and programmatic needs of the K-2 program. And it's that revised document that we are considering tonight. So what's the vision of this project? It is to create a pre-K-2 facility that will provide flexible pre-K-2 spaces to meet the needs of 21st century early elementary education and to accommodate cyclical fluctuations in enrollment. Our vision is that it will also fully accommodate a growing special needs population, that the facility will improve building efficiency and circulation, that we will improve site circulation and parking, and that we will create a facility that will serve the community for at least the next 20 years. Now, as I said before, the statement of requirements does not propose a solution. At this point, we do not know if the existing building will be renovated or if a new building will be constructed. Having said that, if a new building is constructed, we would expect that it would have a useful life of more than 20 years. But if the existing building is renovated, we can expect that the major components that will be replaced, for instance, the roof, will have a useful life of at least 20 years. So as we plan a facility that meets our overall vision, what are the objectives of the project? We want to provide preschool and K-2 students and staff with appropriate, safe, healthy, comfortable, and flexible environment that is conducive to learning. We want to create a facility that serves the long-term academic, developmental, and social needs of students in the preschool and K-2 programs. We'd like to create a facility that centralizes art, music, physical education, multi-purpose, and food service spaces. We'd like to create a facility in which we have the highest level of energy efficiency possible in the, well, actually not possible, but that's economically feasible, in the building's infrastructure, envelope, and mechanical systems. And we would like to reduce the magnitude of additional capital expenditure at the MillerDriscoll complex in the future years by coming up with a comprehensive, flexible, and long-term solution. And I think at this point, flexibility and foresight are two very important concepts when you're looking at creating a facility that's going to last for multiple decades. One of the ways things we have to look at in terms of flexibility is enrollment. I know this is somewhat of an eye chart, but what it shows is that on October 1st of 2011, the K-2 population was at 871. I believe as of February 1st, it's 10 higher, it's 881. And that population is projected to decrease down to 743 in 2015, and then begin to increase again. So it's going to hit its low point at about the time the construction should be starting.
I think it's important to note that these projections are based on children who are not even born yet, and it is our best estimate, but it might be off. And
Yeah,
if-
beginning in 2016, we are doing projections based on kids that aren't born yet.
Right. And if Wilton continues to grow, we can anticipate that our schools are going to continue to thrive.
Yes. Now, the preschool enrollment was 41 in September of 2008, and it had grown to 81 by May of 2010, and we can expect it to continue to grow. And as history has shown us, there are cyclical fluctuations in enrollment over time, and we have to take those fluctuations into account when we're planning this facility. Over the next 20 to 40 years, there will be fluctuations in the school-age population. And technology is another area which requires us to build flexibility into the facilities. I know that in the late 1960s, when the schools opened, I doubt anyone envisioned that elementary school education would include a mobile, web-based type of learning environment. And we all know how fast technology is changing and the increased role that it is playing in education. And so for that reason, we need to design flexible spaces that will be able to accommodate whatever the type of technology is in the next 20 to 40 years. The preschool has certain facilities requirements that total approximately 9,900 square feet. Currently, there are 3 preschool classrooms, 2 of these classrooms were created by partitioning the former MillerDriscoll multipurpose room. Those classrooms have a high ceiling and the acoustics are very poor in there. We've estimated that we will need 5 classrooms. Each classroom should have a children's sink, 2 reading or book areas, a table area, and a play area. And on average, we expect there to be 16 children in each of those classrooms. In addition, each classroom should have a lavatory with a changing table and appropriately sized fixtures. Currently, there is 1 bathroom for each gender in the preschool area, and then 1 unisex room with a changing table. The bathrooms will not accommodate a wheelchair, and the fixtures are not sized for preschoolers. Each preschool classroom should also have an equipment storage room accessed directly from the classroom. Right now, the bicycles and the tricycles and the wagons that are used for motor skills development and sometimes for transportation are all parked around the core walls. It's like a little parking lot up there. Yep. And we also need a dedicated preschool multipurpose room, and that's a room that would accommodate play groups, parent instruction, social skills instruction, and adaptive physical education. Right now, the preschool's multipurpose room is a tiered former music room, and it's very difficult for any child with mobility issues to use that room effectively. Also required are adequate therapy and office spaces for the speech and language pathologist, the social worker, the psychologist, the behavior analysts, and we would have OT-PT space that is shared with the K-2 program as it is now. And finally, there's a need, as you can see on the PowerPoint slide, for some administrative space dedicated to the preschool. So now let's take a look at the programmatic needs of the K-2 program. The Statement of Requirements calls for 48 general classrooms of 1,000 square feet, 3 per grade. We'd like the kindergarten rooms to have dedicated lavatories that are accessed through the classroom. With the exception of the Peach Corps, most of the existing classrooms in the MillerDriscoll complex are approximately 800 square feet. And I think if you've been in them, they're pretty tight. The classrooms in the Peach Corps are the newest classrooms in the building, and they average a little bit above 1,050 square feet. And so I asked myself, what changed from the time Miller and Driscoll were opened in the late 60s to the time the Peach Corps was added in the late 1980s? When Miller opened in 1966, it has grades 4, 5, and 6, and when Driscoll opened in 1969, it has grades 2 to 4. And it wasn't until 1974 that Miller and Driscoll housed kindergarten and first grades. Now, as I look back on my educational experience in the late 1960s, we sat in desks all day. The teacher stood in the front of the room and taught us. And there was absolutely no technology, not even like a calculator. And that is not the way that education is delivered now. It's just not the model. Today, there are often 2 adults in the classroom. There are several educational activities happening in the same classroom at the same time. The classrooms need to include desks for 18 to 22 students and a teacher. There are areas for small group instruction. There's a reading or a book area. Whenever I'm in Miller Driscoll, there's always an area for the kids to sit on the floor. And that's quite a bit of space, and they always seem to be on the floor. You go in for a reading aloud day, and you've got 20 little kids on the floor, and they take up a lot of space.
They can get up after they're down.
That's why we sit in the rocking chair when we read.
That's why they sit in the rocking chair, right?
And there's space, we need space for computers and a smart board and in-classroom storage. There's virtually no in-classroom storage in that building. So when you think about all that needs to go into a classroom today, it doesn't fit very well in 800 square feet. And so that's one of the reasons that we've requested larger classrooms in the statement of requirements. In addition, Cheryl has been doing some reading, and education professionals are now recommending classrooms larger than the 800 square feet. And you'll see that Exhibit 6 to the Statement of Requirements is a list of professional articles that support the theory that classrooms at this level should be larger. Our vision is that the specials rooms, being the art rooms, the music rooms, the computer rooms, the physical education teaching space, and the library media center, as well as the food service area, would all be in a centralized location. Currently, there's a lot of valuable time spent by young children with little legs going from one end of the building to the other to reach these spaces. One of the computer rooms and the science room and the science storage room would actually be a recapture of space that was previously lost to the preschool program. In addition, there are reading spaces and small group instruction spaces and special ed and support services spaces that are currently in alcoves and or closets, and the statement of requirements calls for those to be relocated into proper classroom spaces, and then the areas vacated could be returned to storage, because one of the problems in all of our schools is that there is simply inadequate storage. And also, we would like to dedicate a room to the kinder care program. Now, the K-2 program also has some administrative and operational needs. The only thing that we would be proposing to add to the existing space is a conference room, some main office storage, and a receiving area. Currently, all the meetings such as PPTs take place in either the principal's office or an assistant principal's office, and then that administrator is out of their office and doesn't have a place to work. Currently, all the science instructional materials are stored in the custodial area behind the Miller cafeteria. That has displaced the receiving area. The receiving area is now behind the stage in Miller, and it's completely inadequate for the amount of stuff that comes into the building. There's some general facility needs. As I said before, in general, we envision the highest level of energy efficiency that's economically feasible in the building's infrastructure and envelope and mechanical systems. If this building is to be renovated, specifically the roof and the steel siding need to be replaced, and there needs to be a cost-benefit analysis done with all the exterior windows to see with regard to replacing them with a more energy-efficient window. We know that the existing PA system is unreliable and in need of replacement. We would hope that the lighting and HVAC systems would be conducive to teaching and learning. Currently, many of the air conditioning units are oversized for the room, and they are noisy, and it's difficult to teach with them on. The electric, data, and telephone systems need to be updated to accommodate our technology needs. The school should be equipped with a fully code-compliant fire, smoke, and CO2 detector system, as well as with sprinklers, an intrusion alarm system, and exterior and interior security cameras. And there's more detail in the statement of requirements, but there is an additional need for both student restrooms and faculty restrooms throughout the building. School climate is a concern. A school facility is an integral part of an educational program, and it can create a certain school climate feeling. And we would like the MillerDriscoll facility to foster a positive school climate. A climate where the building is welcoming, comfortable, safe, healthful, and well maintained. We would envision a single, highly visible entrance to the school, and that the interior of the building ought to be organized in a way that reflects the needs of young children and makes them feel that they are part of a small, caring community. With respect to the site, if the existing building is renovated, there should be an access road that circles around the rear of the building. This is a site that is difficult at best with respect to parking, and certainly when there are parents invited to the building, you have to invite them in limited numbers because of the lack of parking. We don't know exactly what is permitted by planning and zoning, but additional parking to the extent that's permitted by planning and zoning should be added to the site. In conclusion, there are a couple things that I would like you to take away from this presentation. The statement of requirements sets forth the vision of the project, and it outlines needs, but it does not propose a solution. The solution that we envision is one that is a long-term solution. And in planning for a building that meets that long-term, that idea of the long-term solution, we need to use foresight, and we need to think about the flexibility of the spaces that we're creating in building a long-term solution. And I really do believe that a long-term solution is in the best interests of the town of Wilton. And so if you have any questions on the specifics of the document, I would be happy to answer them.
Karen, Cheryl, thank you. Thank you very much. Gary, we know how much work you've put into this, even through our February break. I know you were working diligently on it, so I greatly appreciate all of the effort that you've put in, and I echo your previous sentiments that had the work not been done ahead of time by the strategic planning team, there's no way we could have gotten to where we are today. So
Right.
I appreciate it. Questions?
Throughout your presentation just now and in your conclusion slide, you mentioned how the SOR should not propose a solution.
Mm-hmm.
But you pointed out a couple cases where, and I read it in here where it says that if there's space for this, then we'll move something out of the storage space and it'll become, so does that language then kind of suggest renovation versus building new? That's what I was curious about.
It was very difficult to
Yeah.
make the document neutral with respect to that, and in part it was giving the history of how we got to where we are. I don't know what the town's appetite is for renovation versus build new.
Right.
I think we will need, when we send this to the Council on Public Facilities, to carefully craft a cover letter, basically saying it could go a different way depending on the decision that the Board of Selectmen make.
So you were aware that some of the
Yes.
language was suggestive?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any way to, when you look at the spatial needs and functions need to be met, is there any way to come up with a percent as to what the existing structure meets in terms of our needs and desires?
Well, certainly we know that the existing, I would say the existing library and media center is sufficient. The existing boiler rooms are sufficient.
That's the answer.
The front door works.
I think part of the answer to that's a very difficult question, and it is partially part of the question that Laurie was asking, is can you make a building work and work it out and use some of less than desirable spaces, yes, you can, but as you go forward, it becomes more and more difficult. So, you know, in terms of percentage of those, you have a first grade classroom, for instance, that might be 785 or 800 square feet. You can do that. Is it tight? Is it, you know, cords going all over the place? Is it a smart board that doesn't quite fit? Is it because it's under a low-hanging ceiling? Does it have an HVAC system and a air conditioning system that is quite loud? You know, so that's part of the dilemma of those things. Does it have any storage in those rooms? No. Is the sink working? No, not a lot of times. But they're facilities that are there. But it's the best use of a facility, and it's over time deterioration of those, and does it meet the best educational standards for the students at that time as the needs have changed over the years.
And the teacher makes it work.
And the teacher makes it work, but you know, when you think that over these years so many things have changed, as Karen illustrated, is when that building was built, you had one teacher, you know, Rose, you have two teachers, perhaps a para that's in there, a special ed teacher that's in there, children that have many special needs. That in the 60s, when that building was built, there were no special education children in the buildings at the time, and those needs have changed. You know, SRBI, when you're delivering intervention services, all of those things. So it's hard to determine a percentage of, you got all those pieces there, but you can figure out, like, if the room is 800 square feet and the most desirable is 1,000 square feet, yes, you can figure that percentage out. It's a little more difficult, but it could be figured.
One of the things I don't want to happen, Gil, is I don't want the town to put a substantial amount of money into renovating this facility and still feel like that it doesn't work. I want it to be, I want it to be done right. I want it to be functional for its purpose, which is early elementary education.
There are a couple things that I noticed on one of the walkthroughs, which is a room may be 890 square feet or 1,025 square feet, but it's not a rectangle.
It's a polygon.
Right.
It's, I'm not,
Use it for
I'm not-
geometry.
some of the space, I'm not sure what
We're
they are.
smarter than the
They have
question.
these
What's a polygon?
tiny little corners that you can't put a chair in, you can't put a
Right.
desk in, you can't put a bookshelf in.
Can't do
So,
anything.
so it's counted in the square footage, but it's not usable.
Right.
And one of the other things that I saw too is the building was originally designed and built to be an open classroom environment. So a lot of the walls are movable. So an 800 some odd square foot room wasn't 800 square feet all day. The walls opened up. Those have now since been
And
closed, drywalled over, and never to be opened again. And I think it's also important to note too, and I want somebody to correct me if I'm wrong on this, my understanding is that the facility was built not only in the open school environment world, but also for an older student. And we're now adapting it for a younger student, and that's a challenge for us. We laugh about the 12 to 16 inch inseam on a kindergartner or first grader, but when you look at this floor plan and take that 16 inch inseam from one end to the other, you're on a journey.
It's a lot of stuff.
I mean, it's valuable educational time that we're
It's
losing.
nap time after.
So those are challenges that I'd love to see fixed, and I think you did a good job of capturing them in the statement of requirements. Maybe we can fix it in this facility. I know that within the town, we've done some phenomenal renovations with Cider Mill and with Middlebrook. I'm optimistic that, maybe Merlin can do his trick, but if not, maybe the solution is another facility too. I don't know.
Isn't that Malcolm, not Merlin?
I meant it that way.
I have,
Yes.
Well, but one of the things too is that those buildings were different, as they were primarily rectangle buildings that, that they built off of. And then this one has, it kind of was like Topsy and just kept, the corridors, the mile-long corridors, and so it's a bit of a different animal
Yeah.
that we're
It
looking
is.
at there, and that's part of the challenge.
And it's already been adapted. I mean, it used to be two separate buildings,
Right.
two different schools, and so no one was ever walking from one end of Miller to the other end of Driscoll. And so it's already been added on to a couple of times, and so
And you can't go
people,
up.
people have tried, right, I mean, to make those.
I think that's another challenge that the building committee, assuming the Board of Selectmen is going to convene one, is going to be faced with, is just the sheer magnitude of footprint. The number of walls we have to heat, the number of windows, the floor space, the ceilings, we have to heat it, we have to air condition it, we have to light it. It'd be interesting to see how efficient that building
Right.
is relative to the high school, for example.
To that point, I was wondering in your analysis where you weren't able to find the original architectural design, so you had to remeasure the building. What did you come up with as far as the square footage of the unusable, unteachable space, like those extended hallways, those? Do we have some sort of number that says it's X number of
We
square
could- we
feet
could
that
get
we
that.
have to heat and light and all of that, but
Get that.
We'd have to go
Just
back and
curious.
actually count it up off the floor plans. I mean, the total square footage of the facility is about 130,000 square feet.
130, okay.
But you just look at the square footage in those hallways
Right.
that
And the
really
course, yeah.
counts against.
Which I remember once you said something that as the state considers all of that
Yes, they
from
do.
a funding perspective as usable space when truly it isn't.
And one of the things in looking at, then Ken's done some research in this, but the whole issue of state, reimbursement for projects is still driven off an antiquated formula, which the state has not changed. So that's problematic
And
in terms
that's,
of you go for reimbursement.
my last question is, in the SOR, one cafeteria
Right.
would be, was that going to be your question?
That was my question, so thank you.
One cafeteria to serve the entire facility?
That's
Preschool as
that's
well
an
as-
option.
Okay.
And it could also double as multi-purpose room, multi-purpose space.
Well, what do you mean that that's an option? It would be preferred to have more than one cafeteria, or what's the wish list as far as a cafeteria?
I would say the wish list is a single cafeteria.
One single, that could serve the whole
Yep.
facility.
And the preschoolers do not need access to food services, is that correct? They don't use a cafeteria?
As of
No,
now,
they
not-
don't. They
not
don't.
right
You're
now.
right.
but as of now,
No.
but if we're thinking 20, 40 years ahead, perhaps at some point,
They're not a full-day program.
Not
now,
the
at this
preschools.
point.
they're not now, that's my
Right.
point, yeah,
But
so.
conceivably kindergartners might be. I mean, that's always a point.
Kindergarten is, yeah, that's
They-
Point
always,
of
they already
discussion.
But they already are.
Okay.
but
Yeah,
not
they're
all
full-day.
5 days
Not all
though.
5 days.
No, but all five, 4 of the 5 days
Right.
they eat there, so you still have to plan for
Right,
it. It's
right.
as if they were, so
Okay.
that piece is just a different wave, it's just another group that goes through.
Okay.
So it's not, you don't need more space, it just takes more time to get more kids, more waves through.
And the benefit of one cafeteria is one kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the food.
But I just don't want to,
And one staff to
underestimate
staff
that
the kitchen.
need. I don't want us to underestimate the cafeteria need.
Right.
Right.
Especially if we're thinking
Right.
20, 30 years in the future, because we
Right.
don't know.
Do we expect that the town will add to the scope of requirements since it serves as a emergency shelter?
That's a great question.
That was the question that Malcolm White posed to the Board of Selectmen. I have not heard from anyone on the Board of Selectmen a desire to put anything in this document.
Regarding.
Yeah, no, I have not had a conversation with anyone either.
I don't know.
Well, the way the process works too is that, as Karen said, is that it goes to the selectmen and goes to Council on Public
Goes to the
Facilities
council,
first, excuse me.
yeah.
And then they will send it to the selectmen with maybe some annotation that says that, but then it's up to the selectmen to select a building committee. And the building committee is going to wrestle with the statement of requirements that have been presented, and how can they develop a facility that meets the requirements, or renovate one that meets the requirements.
You know, you make an interesting point, because during the Board of Selectmen's meeting this week, there was discussion about the statement of requirements for Comstock that came up a few years ago. And it was a very thorough process. They came up with a building committee, and they came up with a budget of $30 million, and they said, that's wonderful, it's a great facility, no thank you, we can't afford it, we don't want to move forward with it. That entire project still sits out there in the wings, and now they're renovating Comstock. It it could be that somebody says, why don't we look at a single facility that perhaps takes in the needs for multiple town issues? Our first selectman has pointed out many times that we have to wrestle with the priorities that we have. We have overcrowding in the annex, we have overcrowding in the police station, we've got a number of issues. So it is very possible that the Board of Selectmen looks at our statement of requirements and perhaps combines it with other town requirements. So I think that's possible. And, you know, you make a good point. I forgot to thank Malcolm White and the Council on Public Facilities for all the work they did in providing his input and putting this
Yeah.
together. So,
They were quite valuable.
other questions? Okay, it comes back to us for review and approval, I believe, at our next meeting.
Yeah. We'll clean up the red line copy and have a clean copy in the packet.
Wonderful. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we move on to action items. We've got some budget revisions that Mr. Post is going to bring us through, and it's up for discussion and approval.
The two items, as you know, we started this process months and months ago of doing an RFI, or a request for information from health benefit providers to see if we could, us in the town, could achieve some savings either by getting Anthem to bring their fees in lower, or another switch to another carrier. And at this point, it looks like we're going to stick with Anthem, although we haven't sealed the deal yet. But it will produce a reduction of in our budget of about $140,000 in their ASO fees, which is their administrative services fees. So we're proposing to adopt that savings now. And then at the Board of Selectmen's meeting Monday night, they also agreed to remove or to put on their capital bonded plan the $145,000 for replacing the Middlebrook Auditorium seats, and the $70,000 for the air conditioning in the Middlebrook Auditorium. The $70,000 was in our original plan for next year, so that doesn't affect this year's budget, but the $145,000 does. So those two reductions bring our budget down to $74,231,358, which is a 2% increase over this year's budget.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do I have a motion to accept?
Question. Will this go on as a single item, or will it be combined with something else?
I believe they have it on their plan as a single item.
Yeah, we received a copy of the Board of Selectmen's proposed budget today. I forwarded it out to everybody. I don't have a chance to see it. Looks like it's going to go on as one item.
Yeah, it looks like it's a lump sum of school projects being
Yes.
Middlebrook, the
Engineering for the bathrooms.
engineering for the bathrooms, the roof,
Right.
and the auditorium seating.
And they also increased the amount for the engineering for the
Right.
restrooms
Yes.
from 100,000 to 50,000.
Correct. So, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, future timeline. I want to draw special attention to a technology applications workshop that we have here in this room on March 14th at 4 p.m. I know there's a lot of discussion in town about what the school district's doing to leverage technology. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for folks to come in and see and hear what we're doing. Speaking for myself personally, am very excited about what the district's doing, what's in this budget going forward, and what the vision is. So I encourage anybody and everybody to tune into that if you can't be here. Beyond that, we have a regular meeting on the 22nd. The public hearing on our budget is on the 26th at 7:30 p.m. That's 7:30 p.m. in the Middlebrook School Auditorium. And then the following evening will be with the Board of Selectmen, same place, same time on the 27th. And then one informational item, we're going to be looking at the enrollment report. What's that on there for?
It's just information.
It was in the packet.
There you go. Okay. Never mind. Look, I'm a good reader.
You can look at it.
And as we did at the beginning of the meeting, and we do at the end of every meeting, we welcome and encourage anybody from the public to come speak. If you're not able to do so, we encourage you to send us emails. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
I'll move. Say aye. Thank you, everybody.